So I want to just pick more or less 5 items that I see a lot happening in Slovenian companies as they start to go global. So these are just sort of 5 common ones, and you might see yourself in a couple of these. The first one is where somebody has a normal product, but they're going after a hidden market. And here I used an example of, say, something like data storage. So data storage is universal. Everybody has a data storage problem. So, but if what happens is you say, I can't compete in the US, the companies I'm competing against are too big, so I'm going to be the best data storage supplier on the island of Cyprus. That's achievable, but the only reason you're able to sell on Cyprus is because you invested more energy into sales than your competition does. They know how to fix that. And if it's a level playing field and they're putting in the weapons and you're putting in the weapons, you lose because you're not a great sales company. You're a great technology company. And if you were a great technology company, you'd be better off investing not in the technology, but investing in some sort of add-on, some sort of expertise, and working with some other technology providers. So if your strength is your product or your technology or your manufacturing, you have to find a way in which you can enter the most competitive sales markets. So it's okay to test in Cyprus, but it's not okay to make a strategy that you're going to go after secondary markets, because you will ultimately get run over. The second kind of common mistake I see here is, here in Slovenia, shops do a little of everything. You know, somebody sells one of everything, and it's normal for a store. For example, in the United States, you have Bevmo that sells nothing but Coca-Cola and water products, and it's the size of a stadium. So that kind of focus doesn't naturally exist here, and here's where it causes a problem. Here I just have sort of an example. Let's imagine that we just won a trip to Fiji. You and your partner are going to go to Fiji Islands. You take a look on Amazon, you're going to order a guide to the place. You have no intention of going back anywhere into Asia. This is a once in a lifetime thing. So there's 3 books available that cover Fiji. One is a 35-page book that just is Fiji, little tiny thing. The next is all of South Pacific, and it's 900 pages. And the other one is this 8-volume tome of all of Asia Pacific together. The question is, what's the appropriate price for this? If I told you that the 35-page book cost 15 euros, how much cheaper would that 900-page book have to be before you took it? Even though it has the same 35 pages on Fiji, you do not believe that the other 900 or 865 or 55 pages came for free. In your head, there's just no way. So the fact that there's chapters on toga, that's not just an added benefit, that's a negative. So anytime that you launch a product and you have multiple features and multiple benefits, your first instinct is, wow, I've expanded the market of people who might like this. I've bought 3 ways they might say that this is worth a lot of money. No, instead what you've done is, the only people that want South Pacific are people who are going to 5 different islands in the South Pacific. And the only people that want the 9-volume set of Asia Pacific are people who are going to 14 different locations throughout Asia Pacific. So you've narrowed your market, you haven't extended it. So when you launch a product and you're going global, 1, maximum 2 benefits, and nail it hard. That's the best approach. So sort of the other sort of thing related to that is, so this is I call it the benefit buffet, because also if I was to open up a buffet restaurant where you pay 10 euros to have all you can eat, if it has fantastic lasagna, but the rest of my pasta dishes are terrible and the vegetables are disgusting, and nobody's really excited about the meats, how does somebody walk out of my restaurant? They walk out of my restaurant with saying, it's a horrible restaurant, but they got a great lasagna. And I, trying to figure out what's wrong with my restaurant, how do I get more customers? I see the Chinese restaurant and the Japanese restaurant are doing well, so I think I should add Chinese and Japanese to the menu. What does that do? It makes the problem worse, not better. So we get into this self-fulfilling prophecy where I add more and more features, more and more benefits to try and dig myself out of the hole, but it was fundamentally the fact that I had too many to start with that's killing me. And sort of the third take on this, or sort of the third kind of big mistake, is I call it Chinese marketing. So if I could get 0.1% of the Chinese toothpaste market, we can make 100 million a year. Who wants to build a business with me? It's so easy. All I need is 0.1%. How hard could that be? The fact is 0.1% costs a ton of money. It costs more than $100 million to get 0.1%. So you're either number 1, 2, maybe number 3, or you're losing money in a market, right? This was Lynch at GE used to say this, and this is true. So going in, and that 0.1% isn't for anybody that just shows up. That 0.1% is going to take way too much. So if you can't get 10%, 15, 20% of the market, you're wasting your time. So the other component is, so who gets 0.1%? People who are going bankrupt. And then the second question is, in bigger markets, and we were having this discussion with somebody else, here in Slovenia, there's 250 companies that sell accounting software. In Austria, there's 35. In this kind of sector in the US, there's probably somewhere between, I don't know, 8 and 15. Why is that? Part of the reason is nobody believes that anybody smaller is going to survive. This was the problem with the Yugo here. It wasn't just that it's bad quality. The Americans were making bad quality cars. It's nobody believed Yugo would survive. So one of the reasons we do pitches, you know, we just had this great, Carlos just showed why you don't want to get investor money if you can avoid it. But the pitch is still absolutely critical, because one of the things you have to do is communicate to your customers and your partners that you're going to exist. And if you can't do that, nobody's interested, because nobody wants to buy into a small company that won't exist. Kind of related to this is two other kinds of subcategories. So one is, I'd often meet somebody who says, we're going to make a better product and I'm going to get market share because we're cheaper. And then I ask, okay, so you have, your design is fundamentally cheaper? No. Your manufacturing techniques are fundamentally cheaper? No. So why are you cheaper? Well, our competition's greedy. So, for example, software. There's no correct price for software. So if you actually were to win at a low price, they're going to crush you like a bug, right? So they've already got customers. That's one of the most expensive parts of a business, is getting customers. They've already got customers. They already have reputation. You have neither. So if your plan is to win on price, you better actually have a real plan. You're cheaper because you're delusional in terms of, or don't understand why you're cheaper. And then related to that is, I sort of called it two different items, which is, I'm going to sell software in Cyprus and they're not trying there, so that's how I'm going to build my business. Or my competition doesn't care about Europe, or my competition doesn't care about Slovenia. That's a pretty short-term sales strategy. The fourth one is user experience. And here's where we also get some misunderstanding about what does it mean for user experience. A lot of people are kind of hung up on this idea that user experience means beautiful things. It means having great features. It means having it perform fantastic and never having bugs. Yes, that's one component, but actually the real key to great user experience is actually understanding your customers better than they understand themselves. You want to take a look at what an iPhone did great. Yes, it was polished, but it really understood how people wanted to use something. So, and if you take a look at, say, something like Airbnb, that's not the prettiest software out there. It still isn't the most pretty today, but it understood how to bring buyers and sellers together in ways that nobody else could. And that's the key. Here in Slovenia, one of our biggest things is we want to work on the product and make it fantastic and not have to confront customers. You want great user experience, confront the customer, know everything about the customer, understand more about them than they understand themselves internally, and then, and only then, does it make sense to invest in the polish and the technology and the bug fixing. Your product can survive bad bugs. Facebook understood people better than they understood themselves, college and high school students. The product crashed all the time. There was no stability in it, and it wasn't that beautiful to start with. Google the same, right? It's all about really understanding your customer and getting out there. So functionality, getting in front of customers early, early, early. Number 5, so we're going to try and make a business. And normally what you find here in Slovenia is we're great at making products. We're great at designing them, manufacturing them, all that sort of thing. What we're not so good at is getting the sales out. The problem here is, if you were statistically to be a betting man, a great sales team and an okay product almost always kill a fantastic product with okay sales. Slovenia is full of great, superior products that never see the light of day outside. So if you're not focused on how you're going to sell, who's going to sell, who specifically you're selling to, what is going to be the pricing model, how you're going to differentiate, if you're not doing that day one and instead you're focusing on the product, you got it backwards. Because at the very least, your sales needs to be as good as your product, not the reverse. And so my 6th one, my sort of bonus that I'll kind of throw out here, and this is sort of in the vein of Carlos, who to watch out for, and it goes right to what you were talking about by corporate guys. There is a class of people that are time wasters and distractionary. So one of the great things about somebody who told his son, his advice was, somewhere in the world a buyer and a seller are coming together. Your job, son, is to find those two people and stand between them just as they meet. So that's one definition of sales, right? So there's a number of people who want to become your partner, and basically what they want to do is they're staking a claim. If there's gold there, they're going to get it. They're not going to invest anything anyway. They're just going to see if you actually get them. They're not putting any money in the game either. The second thing is, and this is a problem you see a lot more in Europe than the US, but you also see it in the US with the really big, but in Europe you can see it even with the less big, which is there's a lot of companies that have money, they're cash cows, but they don't have a future. Politically, internally in their politics, what they need is a reason to keep spending the money and not have to give dividends back to the investors. They need a reason that they should keep their jobs. And so the way they do that is they show innovation. So on the positive side, big companies like Oracle really are not well suited to innovate. So in theory, your innovation plus their market access and money should be a perfect combination. But the reality is, more than your real innovation, what they need is a great story to tell their board, or to tell their VP of sales, or their innovation officer, or whatever the lip service is. So in general, what my suggestion is, telcos, really bad. The mobile operators, everybody wants to be something other than a bit pipe provider. They've been trying now for 20 years. I can't think of a single telco anywhere in the world that is anything other than a bit pipe provider. But they got tons of people running around distracting you, talking about great partnerships. Big IBM, every piece of technology they have that'll never sell, do you know who they try and get to show that they should get some more funding and work on this R&D project a little longer? They're going to go out and try and get 100 startups to sign up and talk about how it's the future. They don't need, they're not there to actually, it's not, they don't have at stake what you have at stake. So watch out for the time wasters. So the good news is, the disadvantage of Slovenia is kind of melted away. It's never been easier in terms of reaching a global market. We were just talking about distribution of physical products. You now have things like 3PLs, third-party logistics. You can rent a warehouse in Hong Kong for as little, with a cubic meter, for as little as 30 euros a month. and have packages sent for as cheap as €2.50. It's fantastic. Access to customers, education, all these things are really good. So that's the good news, is that actually Slovene companies can now think big and can go after anything. What's important here, though, is that you focus on a defendable market, that you know who your customer is, figure out what is the critical problem you're going to solve, and if you can nail it, you have a defendable growth space. So you want to avoid things where you're, again, avoid things like regional space, avoid the time wasters, and make sure you don't spread yourself too thin in terms of features and benefits. And so with that, I guess we can open up to questions.
Here in Slovenia, how do you see those government agencies that are basically promoting and accelerating innovation? How do you see their role from your perspective?
So that's a fantastic question. I had a debate. We were doing a sort of an incubator with Seed, and my Jaka from D-Labs and I were teaching the first session. And I made the comment, I said, look, be really, really careful when you take government money for the R&D, because they'll drive you the wrong way. And Jaka said, no, 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 don't take the money at all. Now, that's what I wanted to say. I was just too afraid, because I thought it'd be too radical. Governments are usually terrible at things that are changing and terrible at things that are new. They're really good at putting in roads, because basically the roads were designed 2,000 years ago by the Romans, and pretty much the recipe is pretty clear. But in terms of startups, they just learned how to pronounce the word, let alone have the people. You see right now, embassies. You know, embassies used to do all these things. They had to print passports and visas, had to verify people, they had to translate massive amounts of data, they had to represent the country because nobody else could find a way. That doesn't exist. But guess how many people are in embassies now, 20 years later after the revolution of technology and what they do? US Embassy still has the same number of people. The Slovene Embassy in the US still has the same number of people or more. Now they're doing economic diplomacy. What do these guys know about economics and sales? Zero. So beware of people who don't have the qualifications that are there to help, because they can be really distracting. The R&D money in Slovenia is particularly bad because it forces you to spend money on R&D and you're not allowed to commercialize it. Can you think of a worse recipe? I mean, this is just killing somebody. So, and I'm seeing it all the time where it's validation, right? Carlos talked about a VC that I got the money, I'm a winner. No, in Slovenia, we've not yet had an exit. We don't have a winner yet in Slovenia. Boštjan Zemanta got some nice funding. That's great. He got to the ladder. He didn't win. And we need that. We need winners here. And this is, getting government funding is just so bad because you have so many people declaring victory way, way, way too early. Anything else? Are we out of time?
Yeah, we have a lot of time. So please give questions. This is a unique opportunity, actually.
I guess it's easy for you to speak from an outsider's point of view, and you mentioned quite a few mistakes companies here make, but should we feel like we're something special when we make those mistakes, or are they more or less universal?
Okay, so things like, that's a great question. So things like the benefit buffet and going after too many features, what you'll find is that all startups tend to make this mistake, and especially things like engineers, guys who like to build things, people who like building things and like designing things, they tend to make this mistake more than others. But what you'd find is, in the US, they have an instinct for finding a niche. They know they can't be the number 25 ERP company. They know that that isn't possible. So they tend to pull out earlier and recognize what's going on faster. The other thing that's, so what you see is, US would be the best, but it still happens. Europe, you have this problem in general also, because you see every German, we used to Years ago when I worked for Hermes Soft Lab and we supported companies, we used to talk about Germans for German companies. So you'll find like a company in Germany making payphones, and then another company in France making payphones to sell the payphones to France. You know, in Italy, there's a guy selling payphones today, not 20 years ago. Today, there is a payphone company in Germany and another one in France. I'm sure of it. So, yes. And the other thing, though, that is unique to Slovenia, or at least regionally, this idea of 250 ERP companies, well, there's 1,100 in the ex-Yugoslavia region. So it's a bit of an ex-Yugoslavia problem. It's obviously not near as much of an Austrian problem as I described, but still bad. But it's especially a Slovene problem. And I think the reason is because we don't have a strong tradition of sales and marketing. Right? This is just not the instinct. We tend to be great at making products and let somebody else figure out how to get it to market.
No. There is another. We will. Yeah.
Just to follow on, we're not great at sales and marketing, but what would be your advice how to start fixing that?
Well, it's fixing itself, actually. There's been huge improvements in the last couple of years. The biggest problem with sales and marketing, we live in a very protected island, right? We have specific language and specific laws. Now, if you ask somebody in, you know, I remember some years ago, we wanted to, again, with Hermes Soft Lab, we had the CEO of HP coming, and we decided we'd do some VIP event. And one of our biggest clients was Sixt Rent-A-Car. So we were going to get a big Mercedes S-Class and drive her around. Perfect, right? They have the cars, we'll bring them here. Turns out, we couldn't bring the Mercedes into Slovenia. Not because they can't sell it, not because they were worried about it being stolen. It's Sixt Rent-A-Car couldn't be bothered to figure out what the legislation was for renting cars in Slovenia, given its small size. So Croatia, they were stealing cars. Poland, for sure, they were stealing cars. You could take that S-Class Mercedes there because they had a big enough population. So as a result, if you're renting cars in Slovenia, you're facing half the competition you're facing in Germany. So we get this little kind of bubble. It's very easy for us to sell. There's only 2 million of us. Everybody can get plenty of time. There's room for everybody. I mean, everybody's got their own little personal supplier. So this is something that allows us to not be able to sell. And then the second side of that, though, it is getting better, and it is starting to become a tradition. Sales is not something you learn in school. Sales is something you learn through imitation, typically. So if there's no other good salesman, there's nobody to imitate. So if you work with an international company, good chance you're working with a good sales team. After a couple years of exposure to that, you at least have a gut feel for what a healthy operational sales organization should look and feel like. And that's a huge advantage. And that's changing that's changing every year now.
So there is one more question given through the Co-Invest mobile app. The question is, what is your advice for a very young company where they should start finding help to find less than 1 year old a right way? So need some orientation.
So a couple things I would say for every small startup. There's a couple obvious things you can do. Number one, so there are incubators and startup programs. I do some work with Seed. I think that one's particularly good, but there's a lot of decent ones. Education is fine. Education will never hurt you. What's important is, you know, anything that's going to put restrictions on you and distract you, that's more problematic. So feel free to try any of that stuff. Number two, one of the things for Slovenes is there is talent around you. And one of the things that people don't realize is get an advisory board. I say this all the time. Create a group of people that once every 3 months, you're going to invite them to dinner, and for the price of a dinner, you're going to tell them the progress you made, the things you're working on, what you're going to do next quarter, and areas where you could use some ideas. And what's amazing, for the price of a dinner, you can get some of the best talent available in Slovenia and even externally. Why? Because people like that idea. It fits in with people's egos. I've never had somebody, or almost never had somebody come to me and say, would you sit on my board? And said, no. How much are you going to pay me? That's just not my answer. What I'm interested in is who are the other board members, How serious are you about getting something done? That's really it. So do it. Get yourself some external board members. You don't have to give them shares. You don't have to give them money. Just show them that you'll respect their opinions and they'll be surrounded with other talented people. So that's absolutely number one. And then number two is, I'm trying to think, maybe it was you, Boštjan, who once said, spend a week where your customers are. Just go get a cheap Airbnb. Nowadays, you can get these like we share, what is it, the office space. I don't remember what it is, but you can get this cheap office space. I was in San Francisco, it's $18 a day. And you're in these communities, you get a desk, you get an internet, you got a printer, you're surrounded by other entrepreneurs, and you just get into it. Meet with everybody you possibly can, get a feel for what you're doing, because your job is to make something great there. And you have to it gets more and more difficult the further the distance, but spend some time there and get to know the language, not just what language they speak, but how they talk about themselves.